to Paint Your Pet. Here I have an example of what we're going to do today. Now this isn't my pet, but I thought he was so cute. This one is done in a mix of watercolor and acrylic. So this is the one I'm going to be working on. This was my daughter's dog, Jenny, and she passed away about 2 years ago. And so I wanted to do this as a Christmas present for her. So this demonstration is going to be painting Jenny. And what I like about this is my iPad. What I like about the iPad is you can have it right by you, and you can actually, get closer in to see some of the objects that are a little harder to see. And so I like working with the iPad there. I'm going to be using the 300-gram Arches paper. It's better to use a thicker paper just so you don't get the wrinkling. And I'm going to adhere it to my board using tape. It would be better to actually do this on a stretched piece of paper. So if you do have a stretched piece of paper, and for watercolorists, that will be what they normally do. That would be better. But if you don't stretch your paper, it should be okay as long as you have really good sticky tape that's going to hold it down. So I went ahead, took a black and white photo of my little Jenny. A couple things as you're choosing your reference photo that you want to be aware of. And that is, you want to capture the character of your pet. And a lot of that is in the eyes. So you want to make sure that the dog is at eye level and you're not actually looking down at your dog. I think a better portrait is one where you're almost at eye level. You're capturing that special characteristic that says, I love you, that dog looking at you. So this one I upped the contrast a little bit because it was just black and white. And I do suggest printing it out in color to get your colors if you want to keep those colors, but also black and white, because black and white show you the tonal values. And you could actually paint this dog pink if you wanted to. And as long as you have your total values right, it's going to look okay. I mean, other than it'll be a pink dog, but printing it out in black and white photocopy actually really helps you see those differences and those mediums and the light values and the dark values. So I actually made the reference photo to the size that I wanted. This is a little bit dark. And what I did is I went ahead and I drew on tracing paper here the outline so I could see it a little bit better. It was hard to read with this particular photocopy. So this is what I did. It's a very quick little sketch, but what you want to pay attention to is the eyes, and the nose, and don't make shortcuts like make a round circle. Like really look at your lines, and it's better to do short little lines because those little bits make a difference, and to getting the right perspective, getting those angles right. So pay really close attention as you're copying of the angles, and that's really going to help give it a more realistic look. So what I did is I put this up on my window and I traced my watercolor paper over top and was able to get it on my watercolor paper. And then I adhered my watercolor paper to a stiff board that is covered in a plastic wrap. So if you can go to Drawing Cheats, I have it on my website and it's a free program to follow. It'll show you different ways of actually transferring it to your paper and making a copy from your photograph. Alternatively, if this was a stretched piece of paper and I couldn't put it up to my window, I could actually put the carbon paper underneath, tape it down, make sure you get the right side, the darker side down, line it up, put it on, and traced over with a pen, and that would have worked as well. It's also cleaner to actually do it on the window, and most people have access to a window there. So that's what I would suggest as your first go-to. Now, do not use wax paper to do this, because what's going to happen is you're going to transfer the wax onto your watercolor paper, which will resist the paint. So you want to make sure if you're going to go the tracing paper route that you actually have real tracing paper. So don't try and make a shortcut by using wax paper. I've drawn the picture out very lightly with a pencil, and we are going to outline this in a couple of different options. Just going to show you a few different things that you could use. Now you could use a drawing marker and you could outline it just like that. You won't get the kind of free flow that you get in some of the other techniques I'll show you. And you can actually use different thicknesses, which will give you different looks. Just make sure whatever marker you use that it is permanent and fade resistant, waterproof, because you don't want it to smudge all over when you put your paint on it. So most of them will say whether it's waterproof or not, water permanent markers. This one says fade proof, fade resistant, and smudge proof. If in doubt, put your marker on your paper, take a little bit of water on a brush and see if it smears. So you don't really want it to smear if you're going to go that route. The other route is using some of these pens that you can fill. So these pens you can buy, they're empty when you buy them, and you can fill them up with whatever color paint you want. Now this is filled up with a golden product called HI-FLOW. And this is a little bit different than the next step up, which is a fluid, and I'll show you that in a minute. But HI-FLOW, it does just that. It flows really, really far. It really flows like an ink. And the equivalent of it would be something like an acrylic ink like this, called an artist ink. Acrylic artist ink. The HI-FLOW golden would respond very similar to this. Next up in viscosity or thickness is the fluid acrylics by Golden. So I'm actually going to be demonstrating with using a fluid. It doesn't flow quite as much as the HI-FLOW, so I have a little bit more control. It's a little thicker, and I'm going to do that. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is that they do have a new line of matte acrylics as well. So you got to make sure that when you're buying it, you check that. It's a little harder to see. Matte fluid there. So you do have a matte color as opposed to more of a glossy in the black, the carbon black here. This one's, you can see the difference there. It's got a little bit more of a sheen in this one. This one is more flat. So they do have that option too, which is nice if people really like that flat look. So you just fill up these things. These are filled up with fluid because they flow a little nicer like an acrylic ink. They have different nibs, different shapes. This is a wedge. You always got to make sure if you're using the fluids that you give a good shake. It has a ball in it there, and the paint seems to settle a little bit, especially when it's a mixed color like this. So this one's a HI-FLOW, a little bit of a different nib. And the metallic ones don't seem to flow quite as nicely. There's a metallic copper color, and that's a wedge as well. They don't seem to flow as nice. So I would probably recommend not using the iridescent ones in here. And they also have, look at this one, ginormous marker. It's for really big applications. But this one is a silver as well. Needs a good shake. You can also use a Sharpie. It's a permanent marker. That worked as well. I tested that and it doesn't bleed. So there's different kind of ways that you can actually outline. But today I'm going to be outlining with a Gutta Bottle. This is a Gutta Bottle here. I think they're usually used for silk painting. And what you do with this is you usually outline your object, because with silk it just goes crazy, and so you make a little confined area with a raised application of the paint using one of these, and then when you apply your more watercolor like dyes, they are contained within that shape. So this particular one comes with 3 different tips, and they just go on the top here. And I fill these up both with the fluid and the HI-FLOW. On this one, I'm going to use the fluid because I have a little bit more control with it that way. And I'm going to paint with the HI-FLOW to give a watercolor-like effect. This is another type of bottle you could buy. It's called a fine line applicator. This is a standard tip. And I think I have HI-FLOW in here. So it flows, whoa, you can see how quickly that flows. And here's the difference with the fluid. See how it holds its own a little better? And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spraying it. So I'm just going to see if it will move. They both move pretty nice, but look at that. See how crazy that goes? They both kind of give you a lot of movement, but the high flow will flow a whole lot more than the fluid. So it might be good as you're doing this to practice a little bit before you get to your actual drawing. And one of the things I will say when you're using these Gutta bottles is that you need to clean these out every time you use it, because it's a very fine tip and it just dries in there and then you'll never be able to use it again. You can use a pin and keep it in the top to keep it for a while, but I find it's best to take off the tip and rinse it out as well as possible, and it'll last a little bit longer. Some of these are so fine I can't even get a pin down them. Rinse them out really, really good, dry them off, and then you'll get more than one use out of them. You need to practice your pressure as you do this. We're going to be outlining, so you don't want to press too hard in the beginning, otherwise you'll get a blob. And then practice with a spray bottle, spraying it. You don't want to give it too much water. Now I'm using a smaller spray bottle, and what works better, rather than having like a perfume mist where it's a steady mist everywhere, it actually works better if you actually stick a pin in the top of the sprayer so that the spray comes out uneven. Then you're going to get more variety in your sprays, and it's not going to drench it quite as much. One of the things I like is this bottle here, ugly as sin, but it finally took me all these years. I kept on losing it, could not find it amongst all my stuff, so I painted it bright pink, and now I can find it. But it is like a garden sprayer, so it has an adjustment here, so you can adjust how much spray. I always test it on my hand first before I go to my paper, just so I can see what the spray is like. The tendency with something this big though would be to spray it too much and then your paint's going to run like crazy. So do a little bit of practicing on a spare piece of paper, just getting the feel of it, getting the feel of the Gutta bottle if that's what you have. Then you can go to your drawing, which I'm going to do now. For those not usually working with acrylic, or this is your first time using acrylic, yes, it does stain, and it stains your clothes, and you can't get it out very readily unless you have fantastic spray. Fantastic spray works fantastic for getting acrylic out. Best to get it out as soon as you see it's in your clothes, or otherwise just wear clothes that you don't care if you get it in. So we're going to start here. Now, I am just going to be using black. You can use different colors. On the example I showed you here, I actually use a white acrylic on here. In here, and you're going to get different effects with each of them, and you can do what you want. You're going to need 2 Gutta bottles if you have different colors, and I've used bronze color, all different colors, so you can kind of experiment with that. With this, I'm just going to demonstrate the black, and I'm already covered in it myself, so I'm just going to go and very quickly, kind of loosely, I'm going to start with giving my outline. I don't want a complete cartoon outline. I want a little bit of freedom, a little bit flow. You've got your pencil there. Don't feel as if you have to exactly keep with it. It's just there as a reference. Try not to get your hand in it. But what I was doing when I was making my sketch was actually looking for the light areas and the dark areas. Here's a dark area here, which I'm going to fill in a little bit. But be a little bit free and fun. The more fun and freedom you have as you paint, it reads. It reads in your painting. If you're too precise and too concerned about how it's going to turn out, it shows as a tightness, and you don't have that same kind of freedom that you'd have if you're just having a little bit of fun. And you don't have to outline everything. Leave some things to the imagination. It doesn't have to be perfect. I would say be way more careful around the eyes. Be careful not to run my hand through it. Now, this dog has white eyelashes, and so I'm going to do that, I think, afterwards. Oh, okay, so I've gone a little bit far here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray. Some of it's dried, so some of the stuff I originally started with, so I want that kind of loose freshness, so it doesn't look so tight. Oops, okay, that's a lot, so I'm going to dab. And you can see where it had been drying a little bit, didn't run quite as much. There, that was a little bit fresher, and so it really ran a lot. And if you use the high flow, it's going to run even more than that. So you can keep dabbing it up. Oh, look what I did. I double dabbed. Good. You want to be careful not to do that. I didn't mean to double dab there. Let's see if we can get some of that out. Oh. We can reduce that later, but you don't want to get the same double dab because you'll be putting stuff down like I just did. Oh. Couldn't help myself. Might want to change directions a bit. Woo! That's okay, because that nose is going to be black anyways. Gives it some texture. A little bit up there. A little bit there. Just trying not to overdo it. You want to have some hard edges and some soft edges, but not too much. Look at me, I'm already covered. Oh no! Okay, I'm gonna wait a little bit because I've actually wet the paper, so let's see what happens when I do this. I don't want it to go crazy. But you're also going to get a different effect too when the paper, look, see how it is when the paper is wet. It's a different look too. I'm just going to do these. It's going to spread a bit. But you know what? I am going to wait until the eyes are fully dried because I do not want them to spread too much. Those are really important, the eyes. So I'm just going to wait a little while. You don't want to overdo it. Less is more. There we go. Keep watching how far that's spreading. Trying to use a clean spot of tissue. And I'm just going to look at my reference photo a bit as I fill in this eye. As I said, I'm going to do the white eyelashes later. Pay attention to the way the direction of the hair when you're doing something with hair. Follow the direction of the hair. It gives definition to the eye and to the contour of the dog. So I'm looking for the dark areas, the medium areas, the light areas. Just adding a bit of definition, a little bit of fun. Trying to capture the character. I'm going to leave that to completely dry. I'm going to look closer at my iPad for that eye so I get that eye looking just the way it needs to. The shape of the eye. There we go. So we're going to let that dry. So I've laid out my colors here. These are all mostly HI-FLOW acrylics from Golden. And some of them are transparent ink. So this first one here is a transparent raw sienna by Liquitex, and it's acrylic ink, and it has a little dropper. The red here is Scarlet, and this is an artist ink as well. So that one's the raw sienna. This one is a nickel azo gold. I love this color, very transparent. The nice thing about Golden that they do is they put the real paint on top of black, so you can actually see how opaque or transparent it is. Again, this is a HI-FLOW. We're going to try and do this like a watercolor painting. The next one, and this is my other favorite color, just love this color, quinacridone nickel azo gold. Love that. See how transparent that is. Lovely red color there. Kind of burnt sienna color, and that's a HI-FLOW as well. Then the next color, I like a little bling bling. This is iridescent copper fine, and that's a HI-FLOW as well. And that's that one there, which a little bit of that's kind of fun. The next one is that Scarlet. And then I do believe I have a sepia there. And that's kind of a dark chocolatey brown. I tend to not want to use straight black, either in my watercolor or my acrylic painting, because it can tend to be a little bit flat, and when you mix your colors, it looks a lot richer. So that's kind of a brownie color. And then the next one is actually a fluid. It's a little thicker. Thought I'd try to show the difference. That's a Payne's Gray, a nice little blue there. And then the last one is a dioxide purple, which is very, very dark, just to throw something different in there. And we might throw in other colors, I don't know. Now I've put them in watercolor wells just because they are liquid and they move around. I'm going to have to spray them occasionally just to keep their tops from drying over. But we're going to wet the whole area quickly. I thought I'd start with the background first, kind of push that in, do some fun things with that, not be too concerned. So I don't want to have it blend too much into the dog. So by wetting parts of the paper and keeping the other parts dry, you're stopping the paint from going into those areas. And this is quite thick paper, so it absorbs the water quite a bit. As you can see, I'm going back and I'm recharging quite frequently. I'm going to go over the edge of the back ear just a little bit. Sometimes when you fade the edge, it's not a hard edge. It doesn't look like it's a cutout put on top. It actually looks like it's going in the distance. And so that's why I would cover over that back ear a little bit. I'm going in behind the hair just a tad. Now this is a different drawing than you first saw me in the beginning. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to add with water. I'm going to start with my lighter color first, just mixing it, just seeing, adding bits of water. I'm not swishing my water. I'm actually just dabbing it, pulling it onto the brush, and I'm going to go real quick. See how it's almost like a watercolor feel. Little rule of thumb is what you do in one corner, don't do it exactly the same in the other corner. Break it up. You don't want to have one color just in one part of your painting. So I'm thinking I'm going to fade out a little bit on some of the edges. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this is the raw sienna. Wow, look at that. Woofda! See the difference in those yellows? Oh my goodness. Very different. That's really bright. So I can actually pick a little bit of that up if it's too bright. It also gives me some kind of variegated background, which is kind of cool too. I'm going to pick up some of that nickel azo gold. Oh, look at that. This is my favorite color, one of my favorites. And I see how I'm just letting the water take it, just like I would with a watercolor painting. This is what I love about these acrylics. I'll soften the edge a bit. I just picked up a bit of water. Okay, I'm going to leave that copper for a little bit later. Let's throw a little bit of that red in. Woof! That's really bright. I don't think I want to do too much of that red. Let's just flicking. I'm using my finger here, flicking the brush over just to. Red is quite a dominant color. So if you want a lot of wow impact, I'm going to soften a little bit of that with just a wet brush. Okay, going to the darker color. I'm going to pump it up as I go. I want the dog really to stand out. And so since so much of the dog is actually white, I want to have dark against light. So this will pop the dog forward. Let's go a little bit up here, going over the ear just a bit. Just play, have fun. Ooh. Puddles aren't that great. So what I'm going to do is use my brush to kind of pick up some of that. It's really puddling a lot there because I did not pre-stretch this paper. Look at how that flows. Isn't that fun? That's the high flow. I'm going to pick up more of that nickel azo gold. Just look at that. Isn't that great? You can also pick up your board and move it around. It's almost getting to the point where it's starting to dry. So the great thing about acrylic too is that you can fix mistakes, go over, and change it up. I just soften some of those edges by pulling out the color. Not being too concerned. Okay, so here's a thicker blue. Okay. Just pumping up the contrast here. As I said, the dog itself is white mostly. It's nice having those colors kind of blend in together. Now the main focus is the dog. So we're not trying to make too much of the background. The background is to support the main character, which is the dog. But you also want to add visual interest. And some excitement and some movement. But a grayed down kind of neutral color is actually quite nice because then it makes your subject pop out more against the neutrals. Okay, here I'm going to do a little bit of splattering with that iridescent copper. And if it goes over the dog a little bit, or your pet, that's okay too. But look at the interest that it adds to the back. Don't overdo it too much. And as it starts to dry, I can actually do that same technique with water. And the water will push away the paint. and give you some exciting different textures as well. So I'm going to put some of that dioxide purple in there as well, mixing it up here. Woohoo! Just because I want to. So that's not blending. That's the fluid. So see how it doesn't flow the same, and it's quite strong. Not that they're all very strong colors, but quite dominant there. It hardly takes any. So, well, acrylics, these high flows are not cheap. The little goes a long way. That's nice having the surprise pop of that purple there. I think I'm going to anchor this one side a little bit to the edge. Okay. And let me just pop. Let's go for that nickel azo gold. Just pop a little bit in there. Woohoo! It kind of pulls it together. Woo! Isn't that cool? Look at what that did. A little bit more down in here. I like that. About up there. Okay, just a little bit more of the bling bling copper. It seems to have. Oh, I know. We're gonna try with the paintbrush. Not the paintbrush, the toothbrush. That's gonna give me different splats. I'm just gonna work it in, and I'm gonna flick it like this. I'm holding it down in this angle, and I'm gonna use my thumb to pull back like that, and that's gonna give finer splats, which is nice to have variety. So now, as it's starting to dry, there's a bit of a puddle there, but I'm gonna, oh, look at that. I love that. Okay, I'm gonna try it with just plain water in here. Let's see what it does. And in here, pushes the paint away a little bit. I'm gonna soften some edges. This is a watercolor technique of just wetting a bit so that the paint follows the wet, just so it's not such a hard edge. And I'm going to soften this too, because this is the background. This is the part of his body. And white isn't necessarily white everywhere. Letting those colors kind of mingle a bit. White has lots of colors in it. See how that kind of pushes it back, and now it looks like it's part of his back. I'm going to soften these edges a little bit. Just wetting the paper and picking that up a bit there. Bring that color in. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry before I go on for the dog. Some of that nickel azo gold. Oh, look at that. And I see how I'm just letting the water take it, just like I would with a watercolor painting. This is what I love about these acrylics. Flicking, I'm using my finger here, flicking the brush over. I'm going to soften a little bit of that with just a wet brush. So this will pop the dog forward. Just play, have fun. Ooh. Look at how that flows. Isn't that fun? That's the high flow. And look how nice that looks. Okay, so it's not entirely dry, but it's pretty dry. And I'm looking at the value contrast between my photo reference, and it's quite dark compared to this. So I may go back and make it darker, and I can do that. And I'm using transparent colors, so that's going to look great. You're going to see the underneath layer. But for now, I'm just going to concentrate on doing the medium values here. So you see the dog isn't completely white. We have it outlined in black. That helps you out with getting your form there. But we want to create some more depth. So you see here that this is lighter than that. There's shapes in here. So we're not looking at the fine details yet. We'll do that later. But I'm looking at the value, the light and dark. This is like the darkest value. This is some of the lightest value in here, but there's lots of different values in here. And the thing with the photograph that you take is that the camera can't capture all the values. It kind of narrows them down a little bit. So that's why it's always better to actually paint in life, but you'd never get Jenny to sit still for more than 2 seconds. So I need to do it by a picture, and plus she's dead. So, oh dear. Oh, poor Jenny. Anyways, so I'm going to start painting and looking at my reference photo for those medium shades. And as I had said before, it can be any color you want. It doesn't have to be true to whatever's in the picture, as long as it appears a darker value. So I am going to go in with a little bit of I'm going to do what I call double load my brush. I got a little bit of this umber, and I'm going to put a little bit of that blue in there. Kind of get a little bit of a gray color, gray down color. It's looking a little green. Well, okay, put a little bit more blue in. And I'm just going to go in, let the paper absorb it. Oh, that's quite green. And do I want green? I don't think so. Well, we'll just go like this. I'm just following the outline of the lights and darks. We'll throw another color in there. And also the direction of how the hairs are going. They're changing directions all over the place. So I'm not getting into too much detail. Let's just go in here. We can change it up. Oops. Down by the eye is some dark. And I'm just very loosely, watering down that acrylic and adding, let's go with this color here. Some medium values in there. Adding water to it down. I think it might be cool to put some purple in there too. Just softening the edge. Leaving those wider pieces and just thinking about where are the mediums here. And already it's starting to dry on my palette. There's some darker in here. Softening it a bit. Pulling it down. Let's throw a little bit of that blue. Oh, here's purple. Yeah, I want to do that purple right in here. I'm looking for the different values. And I'm going to throw it into the ears. We're going to go over that with a black anyways. But it would be nice to have a little bit of that purple shining through. That'd be fun. Throw it down. And let's get going with purple on the nose. That's going to be quite dark. But again, oh, just lost that white. But you know what? That doesn't matter because it's acrylic. And I can go and put white back in after. The nice thing about paper, see how it's all blending? It's the wet's going to the wet. So it's kind of moving on its own, which is kind of nice. So I want to push this part back a little bit. Oh, maybe that nickel hazel gold. Love that. Pushing it back. Because that's more blurry in the picture. but we don't want a yellow dog necessarily, so I'm going to put some purple in there too. Oops. Just picking up very, very little bits. Adding more water to thin it down. Dabbing it in there. This is basically a watercolor technique of painting with acrylic inks. I'm going to be building up color in some of these areas, but less is more. Just keep on looking. Where is the medium parts? We'll get all the details down later, but just look at the medium parts. If you don't like that hard edge there, you get the water, kind of dab it on the tissue a bit, and just touch the edge of it, soften it up a little bit. It's called softening the edge. And if you feel like, oh, I lost some whites, just get your tissue, pull it up a little bit if it's not too dry. Don't like that. Using the back of my brush here just to put some, pull the paint over. Look at that. Giving it a bit of, showing the hairs. So again, follow the direction of the hairs or the feathers or whatever it is you're doing. Okay, I'm feeling that's a little bit too much. Let's pull it back a bit. We still want the dog to read white. We don't want it to look like it's a purple dog, but you want to make the colors interesting. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to pump up the back a bit eventually, but I'm going to still keep on working on my darks here. So yellow is the opposite on the color wheel of purple. So those two colors together should make a dark, more of a dark color. There's a lovely brown, and that was from my nickel azo gold with the dioxide violet. So you're kind of getting a kind of a cool color there. I like that color. Very, very dark. Again, you can just add a dab of black if you want. I'm just going to do a little bit of that. And you know what, my acrylics are starting to dry here, so I'm just going to mist them so the top doesn't dry out. That's a really fine mist spray. Okay, let's put a bit of black in there. So I don't want it to all be black, but I'm going to try and look real close, whoops, at where the light parts are and where the black parts are. So one of the things you have to overcome when you're painting is paint what you see, not what you think you see. We typically want to paint it quickly, and don't want to pay attention to all the detail. And so we make shortcuts. And that's when we start saying, oh, a tree is a trunk, a straight trunk, straight down, and it has like cotton ball things on the top. And actually, trees don't look like that. If you look at a tree, it's much different than that. And so you really have to train your eye. What does it really look like? So I'm just putting other layers here. His ears are quite dark, and I'm just going to build up the layers. I don't want to go straight black. Got some interesting purples in there. I'm also looking at the way the hairs go. It's going to give me more interest. So I'm looking at shapes. You want to look at what are you actually seeing? What are the shapes? So you kind of turn off your brain that tells you this is how it should look, and you listen to your right side that is more intuitive and actually breaks it all down. And think of shapes. And you want to look not at only the positive shape, so the eyeball is the positive shape, but you're looking at the negative shapes too. So the eyeball is the round part, but this is a negative shape. So look at your photo reference and look at that negative shape as well as the positive shape. And because we want to keep this loose, we don't want to get too detailed, but we do want to catch that characteristic. I've got my iPad here and I'm actually looking at the ears. I'm going to go in now and put a layer of that dark in there. Just rinsing off my brush, doing that softening of the edge. If it goes over the line a little bit, that's good. That's gives it a softened edge. Now that is dark, but it's not as light as that white. And just keep building it up a bit. This is, you got different values here and here, but I'm looking at my reference photo. This needs to be a little bit darker. We'll go more in a little bit of the purpley blue. If you feel like it's too much, just dab it up. Try not to double dab. Okay. This is quite light here, and I want this has got more shape and it's closer to you, so I got to push this back. So I'm going to use some of that color as well, some of the blue, stick it in that level, kind of scrubbing motion. Soften that edge. Again, take your brush, wet it, dab it, and then just kind of catch the edge of that. I'm going to put some white over here afterwards. It's always a good idea just to step back and take a look at it. See what you're liking, what you're not liking. Having a balance of the colors, having a little bit of that background color in your dog will give harmony to it. Okay, I'm pumping up that black even more. Paper's quite saturated and wet, so I'm got a bit of time to play with it. But if I had just gone into that and done it all black, it would not looked quite the same. Okay, soften those edges. Kind of looks like his curls in his hair. That's looking more like Jenny. If anywhere you should be spending most of your time, it is in the eyes. So I'm building up to the next stage. You're just kind of building up your layers of darkness. I'm feeling like he needs to pop more. So I'm going to have to do the background. But you know what? I'm going to wait until my paper dries. And that way I won't bleed where I don't want to. So we're going to give it some time and we'll move on from there. Okay, here we are, and we have done some fine details. I've added some whites here on the eyes, and that was with a very fine brush. Just a few little hair marks. I did a little bit of highlighting here on the nose, not much, with my acrylic paints. Just a few little white highlights, little whiskers here at the corner. Did a little bit of white here at the sides, just to kind of finish it up. Spent a little bit more time on that eye, just getting that highlight there, making a difference, that little eyelash there. So just a few little touches in order to finish it all up. And we're ready to frame this. I think we're calling that finished. I'll want to maybe sign it somewhere down on the right here, but we want to decide how we're going to frame this. So my little bonus section for you is going to be framing this on a cradle board. So that's what's next. So finish up your dog or your animal or your pet and get ready to frame it. So since this is acrylic on paper, you don't have to frame this behind glass. But if you wanted to, like a traditional watercolor, you could actually get a matte board and frame it behind glass and it would look lovely. But what we're going to do is we're going to try something different, and we're going to put it on a cradle panel so you don't have to frame it. It looks a little bit more modern. So I was looking at a couple of different sizes. This one's like a 12 by 6 and this one's like an 8 by 10. 8 by 10, 12 by 6. So in order to see how it would look on my picture, I went ahead and got a transparency and outlined it just to see what would it look like if I did some different things here. Could change it up. And I decided I didn't like it thin like that. I had this one here. This was the larger one. And this looks good. And one word of caution, do not draw this on top of your drawing. Look what I did. I got marker all right here. My transparency ripped and I put permanent marker on my painting. So I just put a little bit of white on there, covered that up, and hopefully we can avoid, that showing too much. So I could actually change the format of it a little bit. I kind of almost like it like that. You want to make sure you're not going to get the white of the paper, but just at a bit of an angle maybe. Just change it up a little bit. We'll just see. And so this is a good way to figure out where you're going to put it. You can change it like this. This you probably wouldn't want to do. You don't usually want your animal looking outside. You want to have the space heavy where the animal's looking. On this side, you see the difference? When you put it like this, just doesn't look right. He's like looking out of the frame. You could put it dead center in the middle, but I'm thinking like kind of like about like that, maybe on an angle. We'll just see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark with pencil where I want. I'm going to cut outside my line just a little bit, because after we adhere it to your board, we're going to cut the edges off so they're nice and crisp. And your paper is going to expand a little bit when you wet it with the soft gel paste. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to cut it down, and then I'll show you the next step. So here we have our cradled panel, and I have gone ahead and I have put a coating of soft gel gloss. Here I'm using Golden's soft gel gloss. Doesn't matter if it's gloss or semi-gloss, but the soft gel works better than a heavy body gel. So I would suggest using this, because you really got to do this quickly. You got to get it evenly coated. So I'm going to use a nice big brush to do this. And you need to do this fairly quickly because it does dry fast. So I'm going to start with my board. It has been coated. I went back and forth. I've done it once. So this will be the second coat. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get every part quickly. But you don't want to really get it along the edges necessarily. You don't want it bleeding through onto the top of your painting. But I've sealed it, and it's really important that you do seal your wood, because your wood has acid in it, and that will come through the back of your paper. So that's done really quickly. Now I'm going to get my painting. I'm going to put it down on my piece of plastic here just to keep it clean, and I'm going to do the back of this. And your paper will start absorbing from the back, so that's why you have to do it so quick. And it starts to dry really, really quick. I want to make sure I'm getting it everywhere, but not on the front. And I kind of want it more or less even and kind of quite thick. You don't want to put it on too thinly, because you want it to kind of tack and fill in all the little grooves and stuff. You want to remember to wash out your brush. Okay, so I'm going to take that out of the way, put this down in my clean area, and take my board and stick that evenly around. Okay, I'm pressing down from the middle. All right, so one of the things you want to make sure you get any air bubbles out. So I'm going from the center and out to all the corners. If you have a roller, you can actually roll it out, but this works good with the side of your hand, as long as you're working from the middle out. So you'll see here, see how it's kind of gobbing out? You don't want to get that on the top. Just use a bit of tissue. Get rid of that. So making sure there's a good adhesion all along the sides. Once you're pretty sure you got all the bubbles out, you can turn it upside down on a piece of plastic if you'd like, and you put a heavy weight inside. I just got a book that will disperse the weight a little bit, and I'm going to put a big huge bucket on top, and I'm going to leave that till overnight. And then we will go ahead and cut some of the edges after it's dried, and just making sure it's adhered really, really well. So it's as easy as that. And then later we can paint the sides any color you want, and you've got a really nice modern contemporary framing that didn't actually cost you that much. I actually got this at the dollar store. You know, they're $3 or $4 at the dollar store. Quite reasonable in different sizes. So that's a pretty inexpensive way to frame your painting, and then it'll be all ready for my daughter for Christmas. And you can actually, after you finish framing these, put these in a lovely floating frame just to give it more oomph. Yeah, just leave that overnight for a while. Okay, here we are. This has been sitting all night, so I'm going to take off my book, and I had a big, huge, heavy pail on there. And there you see. Look at that, it's all adhered great. So what we have to do now is cut off the edges, the overlapping edges here. Now I'm going to use an X-Acto knife. I'm pulling the knife out quite a lot because you don't want to actually cut it on an angle. You want to make sure that it's up and down, straight up and down. So I want my blade to go right against the wood. You got to be careful too. You can actually turn it on a bit of an angle, and then as you cut, you're actually cutting into the wood and you're revealing more of the front than you want to. So you want to be sure you're cutting straight down, holding the X-Acto knife right so the blade is against the wood, so you're actually not cutting away the wood. So I'm going to do this one first, like this, because I want to show you another way as well. So please be sure that your knife is very sharp. I've just changed the blade. Whoops. And I'm using a cutting mat below, trying to cut straight down against the wood. Nice clean edge. Another way to do it that I thought would give you an even nicer straight edge is by getting your metal ruler and putting it to the side like this. So I'm right-handed. Just making enough room for having the metal edge right up against it, and just making enough room for your blade to fit in there. And this way you press down on the ruler and you're using the edge of the ruler as your straight edge instead of the board. And you can get a straighter line that way. Sometimes your boards aren't completely. A little bit there. There we go. And there you have it. That's looking pretty good. So you see here, I've got a lovely edge all the way around. Now I can paint these sides, and then when you do paint these sides, make sure you paint the edge of the paper too, because it's going to be white. And what I would suggest is not going like this when you paint, because what happens is the brush goes over the edge and you get it on the front of your painting. So paint this way, where you're pulling the paint and you pull up as you come to that edge. And you can smooth it out later, but as soon as you have that edge going over the side, you're going to get stuff on the front, which you're not going to want to do. But before you paint the sides, you need to seal it, especially if you have white paper here, and it will just protect it and make it last longer. So here's my lovely floating frame, and I'm going to paint the edges, I think, black, so they just kind of disappear. And look how nice that looks. Framed modern, you don't need glass, because I'm going to show you how to seal the edge. So you can seal the paper in a number of different ways. One of the ways is with a spray finishing varnish. You have a couple of different options out there, but some of the things you should look for is non-yellowing. This one says it's for oil and acrylic and watercolor, which is nice. And each of them have a little bit of a different finish. So you have your flat, you have your semi-gloss, and you have your gloss. This particular one, the same company, but this one gives more of a satin finish, and I got that by just trial and error. So this is the acrylic coating, and it says it's a protective gloss, but compared to this, it does seem a little bit more satin finish. So if you are going to use these spray bottles, these spray cans, you want to make sure that you really have good ventilation, because it is toxic to breathe these things in. Have a window open. It should be, follow the instructions on the back of the can. That should be a certain temperature. And when you're spraying, make sure you have a large area that you can go back and forth. And you want to spray off to the side as you start, clear out your can first, and follow over and past the edge of your painting, and then come back in very easy sprays back and forth. Don't go back and forth like this, because you'll get blops at either end when you change your direction. So you want to get It's better to get a number, 2 or 3 coats of thin than it is to put a thick, because you'll have an uneven surface, especially because this is still paper, it's still a little bit absorbent, so it will absorb at different rates. So in order to get a nice consistent finish, you want to be able to have a couple coats. Follow the instructions on the can, make sure you allow for those drying times in the right temperature. One of the things I don't like about these cans, unless you clean them properly, sometimes you only get 1 or 2 uses out of them because they clog up. And I think I have a lot of clogged up ones at the moment. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. There are different kind of things that are made exactly for this. So Golden offers a gel top coat. Now this one has a UV protection in it. This one's a semi-gloss. This one is a gel top coat with the UV, but it's a gloss. So you have 2 differences here. They're a little bit more liquid, which is great. And you can mix a little bit of water in them to make them thinner. And the thinner you use them, the less likely you're going to have some brush strokes in it. I'm going to be using this one here right now. And this is by Liquitex, and that is a gloss, medium, and varnish. And it tells you in the back that you can add up to about 25% water, and you don't want to vigorously brush or overbrush. So you got to get it on there quick, let it sit, hopefully in a good temperature so that it cures properly. And you could put 1 or 2 coats on that. So I have actually mixed it with about 25% water. And when I mixed it in the water, I used a palette knife, not a brush, because I didn't want to put bubbles in. So the palette knife will give you less bubbles than a brush. And the brush I'm using is not an expensive brush, but it is quite soft. So the softer you have, the less likelihood you're going to have of putting brush strokes in it. I'm going to pick up my liquid, and as I go to brush it on, I'm going to do this very quickly. Look at how I'm holding my brush. I'm holding it from the top, and I'm not over brushing too much. I'm going to catch that edge and pull it across. You don't want to go back and forth, and you don't want to have puddles. You want it to be even across. And of course, it's going to unload the paint at the one side. So you got to make sure you're getting paint all the way, or varnish all the way to the other side. Now this will enhance the color, protect it as well. Hopefully you're using artist colors so that they will be protected. Just making sure I have enough. It is absorbing into the paper, so you want to make sure there's enough on there. So I'm just looking sideways to see if I have any puddles. I'm holding it quite flat to the surface. I don't want puddles, and you got to be careful. I'm getting to the point where you don't want to go over that anymore because you will get brush marks. It dries very quickly. But as I said, it's quite liquid. I'm sure you can tell in there how that gloss just really adds a little bit of depth to the color. Now it is a little bit cloudy, as you can see. It's not entirely clear here, but it will dry entirely clear. And the biggest mistake I found is that I forget that there's paint or there's varnish on there, and that will dry and you will ruin your brush unless you go and rinse that out. So I'm going to let that dry, and perhaps I'll put a second coat on there just to pump it up just a little bit more. I will paint the sides, and I will put it in my floating frame and wrap it up with a bow.